But if we can't get that product off the water in a safe way, it's all for nothing.
But the people of Eastern Charlotte know me, and they know that I work hard every day for them. I've done that from day one. I am there for them and just a call away.
Again, the role of mayor for me is, again, it is about empowering council. It is not the role of the mayor to assert one's will onto others.
With a good team around me, I think we can move St. Stephen forward in the really right direction.
Welcome to This Week Uncut. Here's what's making headlines in Charlotte County. I'm Nathalie Sturgeon.
And I'm Vicki Hogarth.
It's been a few weeks since we've been in front of these cameras, so we'd like to welcome you back to the show. And we're going to start with the obvious, which was local elections, which happened this past week.
Yeah, I think anyone who would have been tuning into this time slot knows what we've been up to. We did meet the candidates at St. Stephen, St. Andrews, Eastern Charlotte, and the Courier. You did profiles all the way to Grand Manan and Campobello as well. So, but in this time slot, we've been hosting our Meet the Candidates evening. So people know that we have been busy and very in the thick of this.
And it was much more important for you to hear from candidates than it would be to hear from us over that time period, because we had candidates from both the wards and the mayors. I know St. Andrews was the only exception to that, but they presented their platform and why they were running, and so it was important for you to hear from them. Mm-hmm. And the results kind of reflected a lot of desire for change this time around.
Yeah, let's start by talking about town of St. Andrews, where, like you said, we didn't have a race for council yet. That's coming later this summer. But we did host a mayoral Meet the Candidates that was taking place right here in the W.C. O'Neill Theater. So there was a live audience as well. It was Charles Creaser, Guy Grew, and Steve Neal. How do you think the audience felt after taking in what their candidates had to say?
I never really know, because I think voters often are very late in deciding how they want to vote. But I think the results showed that Steve Neal was by far the preferred candidate in this race. And we actually called that election quite early on in the process, because he was mathematically so far ahead that the other two candidates could never overcome the amount of votes that he had received. And 62% of eligible voters had voted by that point. And I think at 62%, you're not going to expect very many ballots to come back in.
And very, very interesting, too, when you consider St. Andrews was not voting for anyone in council, because in Shamcook and Bayside, we have acclaimed councillors there. But 62% of people in the town went to the polls. And to speak to what that means, I think provincially it was around just over 39%.
That's right.
So that's a huge jump. And for all the towns we cover, everyone was above the provincial average, which shows how engaged people were. But St. Andrews was by far the biggest voter turnout.
Well, and obviously we would like to see the same thing happen for that June by-election. So I want to get that out of the way.
Yeah,
so the reason that the residents of Ward 1 and Ward 2, Bayside and Shamcook, did not vote outside of that mayoral vote is because Annette Harland and Daryl Weir were acclaimed. No one ran against them, so that means they automatically get that seat. Now, Ward 3, we had the death of Kate Akagi during the campaign. So it was after the close of nominations, but before Election Day. And so as a result of that, Elections New Brunswick has to cancel that election specifically, because it changes the process a little bit, and it may open doors for candidates who want to run who chose not to because they liked the candidates that were going to be on the ballot. So that has been rescheduled for June 22nd.
That's exactly it. I think when we first heard the news about the death of Kate Akagi, there were still four candidates vying for those 4 seats. So our first thought was they will be acclaimed now. But no, in the Elections Act, it tells that if there is a death of a candidate, it needs to be rescheduled. So it did make things a little confusing because at that time, anyone who went to the polls saw they didn't even have time to change the ballots. They still had people a space to vote for your councillors, but we were just supposed to ignore that part and wait for the rescheduling on June 22nd. So I guess our Meet the Candidates days are not quite done.
No, they are not. And there will be a by-election. Close of nominations is May 29th at 2 p.m. So the same deadline that you would have, time deadline that you would have had in that first process. And then there's a, sort of a campaign process. And then we go to a vote on June 22nd. Now, I want to just quickly, if I could, explain before we roll Steve Neal's closing remarks. I want to just say that St. Andrews is going to continue with the current council under restricted authority, under restricted power, and that restricted power is governed by the Local Governance Act, Section 56. Please go look at it, read it, understand it. It's quite vague, but it restricts them from, repealing, amending, passing new bylaws, entering into agreements and contracts. But there are two exceptions which do give them comfortable leeway to do certain things. So yeah, an emergency that's in the public interest, and if something has been passed by law prior to the election, so they can follow through with things that have already been voted on. And we're still kind of figuring that out because there is a meeting coming up. So we're still figuring those things out. And certainly this will be a very slow period between now and when we do elect a council.
Yeah, and to keep in mind, there were a lot of serious topics on the go before we went to the polls, before the election season, such as wharf refurbishment. We were waiting to get into the deeps of what engineering will do. I know that was one big reason why I think Steve Neal also had a lot of support, was his stance on the wharf last year, and that's what we heard from a lot of residents too.
Steve Neal campaigned on experience and leadership.
In closing, again, I just want to reiterate that, again, the role of mayor for me is, again, it is about empowering council. It is not the role of the mayor to assert one's will onto others. I completely believe, again, in open and accountable municipal governments. I want to be that candidate for you that is going to listen. As I mentioned at the start, I much prefer to listen to the residents than stand up here and talk. I want to hear your ideas. I want to hear your thoughts. Part of that, again, is going to be about improving the public engagement. Right now, we have basically been doing what we are mandated to do. That, to me, is falling short. It's falling short for the community. It's falling short for all the residents. The timing of it is off. The simple way that we engage them through these public hearing of objections, where residents come up and tell us their concerns and get zero feedback, to me is just, again, it's a terrible way to do it. I would much rather have that open communication back and forth with residents, be able to hear their ideas, their concerns, and then take those to council and give them the best opportunity to serve you guys. Thank you.
Those were Steve Neal's closing remarks at Meet Your Candidates St. Andrews Votes.
Before we move on to the results of St. Stephen, I did, stick a mention in there to Mayor-elect Neal to say, please come for an episode of Town and Province as soon as is possible. And so we're looking forward to that. We're looking forward to having all the new mayors and incumbent mayors come back to the couch.
I actually had the chance to interview Mayor-elect of St. Stephen, Steve Bachmann, the day after the election, and I suggested the same thing. We're trying to make sure we can schedule those Town and Province soon, but I thought maybe it'd be fun to have John Craig, Steve Bachmann, and Steve Neal together for one episode, maybe right off the bat before we get to even a council meeting.
Wouldn't that be fun? I don't know that we can call Steve Neal a newcomer because he's been at the chamber and he was, interim acting, whatever word you want to use, deputy mayor for a little while, and he had run a few meetings, but that's two new mayors against someone who has been at the leadership table for over 20 years, right? This is John Craig's, we're going to get to the results, but, and you know now that he was elected mayor, but this is his 6th term. So there's a lot of experience going back in Eastern Charlotte in that mayoral role.
I think what's interesting, though, when you look at St. Andrews and then St. Stephen, is that the 2 mayors-elect really were both landslide victories. What do you think accounts for those landslides?
Well, I have discussed this in a few places during the election campaign. And if you're sitting in a council chamber, and you have been sitting in a council chamber in the last year, you notice that the energy is different. And I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean that people are engaged in ways that I haven't seen in the past, and that translated to the election. You know, in Grand Manan, we saw 15 candidates run for 9 positions. We saw a slate of candidates in St. Stephen run for 6 positions. So there was a desire, I think, for change. But also people want to be involved. People want to be at the decision-making table. And that comes both out of a frustration with the current, with the outgoing government, but also, you know, wanting to be part of the decision-making process. And we heard that a lot. And there are going to be a lot of fresh faces at the table. Learning the ropes as they go.
Yeah, I mean, especially in St. Stephen, where we only see one incumbent back at the table. That's Wade Greenlaw. So he's back, but we're looking at an entirely new council.
Right. They cleaned the slate for this council. Wade Greenlaw, the only exception. I think that speaks probably to maybe the trust that Wade has built in the community. Incumbency is both a double-edged sword. You're either, you know, incumbency can work in your favor if you're extremely trusted and you've delivered on certain things, but incumbency can also be a bad thing because you're attached to maybe, an overall displeasure with the outgoing government or with other members of the council in which you sat in, which is, you know, so that's the double-edged sword with incumbency, right? You're familiar, but you're also attached to something that people maybe didn't like, and certainly the rest of those incumbent councillors were not reelected, and all the candidates for mayor were not new faces, all of them, but none of them had been mayor before.
Yeah, it was a really interesting meet the candidates for St. Stephen as well, because we saw how engaged the residents were. It was standing room only at the Garceland Civic Center by the time it got started. I think 300 to 400 people. And we heard a lot of questions come in as well. So it showed just how engaged people are. Everyone we've heard from really said this was an important election to them.
Yeah, so Steve Bachmann was elected mayor of St. Stephen. People may recognize that name because he is very involved with the Charlotte County Hospital Foundation. He was sort of instrumental in getting that CT machine that we know is now working and operational in the Charlotte County Hospital. He was here for Santa's Helpers this year. So come back, because we do invite all the mayors to come back to do that. So he's a familiar face. So he is a trusted face. But I spoke to him on election night. I texted him and I was like, I'm trying to get a hold of you. And he said, I'm excited, but now I'm actually nervous, because not only have they elected me mayor, but they have done so in an overwhelming fashion.
Yes.
And so now that mandate is extremely strong. The people of St. Stephen have told him that they want something different.
Oh, it was a clear case. The people have spoken. It was really a decisive vote all around in St. Stephen. And what's interesting, like you say, is that it's a lot of new faces except for Wade. So it'll be interesting to also see Wade's position within this new council, and to see how he vibes off of working with a lot of fresh faces.
And he might be the one that they lean on for advice and for questions in this period, because he does have that experience, and he may help with the orientation package that the council has been developing. We spoke with Steve Bachmann at his home in St. Stephen.
Most of the councillors that were running were actually there, and we were having a little get-together to watch the results come in. And when I walked in, they congratulated me, and I said, "What do you mean? It's not time yet." And he said, "You're way ahead. It's mathematically impossible for you to lose." And I go, and it just floored me, And then we stayed and watched the rest of the results come in, and I was really, really pleased with how it went last night.
That's right. Even when the advanced polls came in, we saw that you were well ahead, and it really was a landslide victory. What do you think is the reason for that?
I think people generally wanted a change, and people wanted, really what I heard mostly was people wanted to be listened to. And the foundation of my campaign was listening to people and making the community part of the decision-making process. And many of the other councillors that were subsequently elected seemed to follow the same kind of pattern, and the town was actually putting us together. You know, right at the beginning of the election, all of a sudden, where my sign was, there was 3 or 4 other signs appearing together, and that happened to be the council that was elected.
How did you communicate that to the public, that you were there to listen? How did you make that clear during the campaign season?
Speaking with individuals mostly. We had, instead of large campaigns with there's a few posters, but we focused on conversation and coffee sessions. So we went out to all the rural fire halls and community centers, held a coffee and conversation, and just sat down and talked to people.
That was Steve Bachmann the day after Election Day outside his home in St. Stephen. I don't know if you can tell from the video, but the cars were honking and waving, and it was really neat to see. There was a lot of excitement in the community. We were right by Tim Hortons during the interview, so a busy spot anyway. So the amount of honks and waves he got, I think it's both exciting for Steve and also a little nerve-wracking to realize, okay, it's time to deliver on these promises, which, as you heard him say in the interview, is definitely something he feels he must commit to and hit the ground running.
Well, first of all, for the first time in my life, I no longer feel like I'm the only one that is excited about municipal politics, and that is a true gift. We will just quickly mention before we go to break the councillors that were elected in St. Stephen. For Ward 1, Chandra Best. Again, Wade Greenlaw and Justin Wesselink. For Ward 2, it's Bernadette Cunningham, Mark Porter, and Steve Morgan. So they will be going to the table, and I'm not sure when their swearing in ceremony is, but those are the people that are going to the chamber.
We are going to take a quick break, but join us again after these messages on This Week Uncut.
During major storms and emergency situations, I am there getting answers and passing along that information on my Facebook, making sure that everybody knows what's going on.
Welcome back to This Week Uncut. I'm Vicki Hogarth.
And I'm Nathalie Sturgeon. We're going to go to Eastern Charlotte and Grand Manan now for their election results. I know you had Grand Manan, so tell us a little bit about what happened in Grand Manan.
Well, Bonnie and most of all the incumbents actually that put their names forward for council, and Bonnie Morris, the mayor, was re-elected, and again, as well as everyone. So it's kind of the opposite of St. Stephen, where you get to see people apparently mostly satisfied with the council they previously had, and there's a few new faces on council too. But yeah, it was a clear vote in the favor of the last council ultimately.
Right, and that the fact that there are new faces at the table is out of necessity because there were members of that council that didn't reoffer very clearly. So the results were strong, though. I think for certainly for Bonnie, I think maybe double the amount of votes. So what did she say? What did she think secured her that next term?
Bonnie just said they were transparent. They felt they had really done a good job and stayed focused on community, and she just felt she had earned the trust of voters. So she was happy to see too. There was a school vote that you covered as well, where the schools across Southwest New Brunswick had their own mock election, and the results on Grand Manan, the real results matched the school results too. So it seems to be generationally the same vibe across the island. So that's interesting to know.
Also, comparatively, the kids also voted for Steve Neal. So there's no councillor votes there, but certainly that there was a bit of mirroring between what the children chose and what the general public chose. So certainly, and she did mention that to us, that she thought it was interesting. But you sort of think about what folks may be talking about around the kitchen table, right? That you know, the topics that matter to them, and if those kids are watching the Meet the Candidates, or they're reading those profiles that we wrote, which the teachers have said that they did that stuff, they're going to see some parallels in the candidates that their parents or their family like, that they also like for very obvious reasons.
And it's always fun to call someone right after they realize they won too. You always get to have a really fun and exciting conversation. Usually you hear a party in the background. In the case of Mayor-elect Morse, she was with her family. I could hear them in the background. And it was fun to just call in and get the feeling right after.
Yeah, I think, sometimes you're a little apprehensive, and I know that, I think, as Steve mentioned in his interview, he got to the watch party and he was like, they were like, you won. And he's like, no, not possible, because it was so early on in the evening. But I those results come in swift and fast. They're tabulated electronically. And so we generally have a pretty good idea by 8:30, 8:40, 8:45 that this is going to be the composition of council. Now in Eastern Charlotte, we did see some changeover in terms of the council. But John Craig, as I mentioned in the first segment, was reelected mayor of Eastern Charlotte for a 6th term.
And his challenger, Councillor Alexa Dedorakis, put up a good fight. It wasn't something like St. Andrews, St. Stephen, where you saw a clear winner from the get-go, right? She put up a pretty healthy fight. So it'll be interesting to see what John Craig now takes away from that race. Maybe he leans into seeing why Alexa was as popular as she was, and maybe thinking on those terms too.
We're not the important people up here. It's the councillors running. They're the important people. They have the votes. Those are the people that you have to really rely on to make decisions. Our job as mayor would be to communicate what the council has done. That's how that works. So really, they're the important ones. They should be asking them the tough questions. But the people of Eastern Charlotte know me, and they know that I work hard every day for them. I've done that from day one. I am there for them, and just a call away. I have my phone in my office, goes right direct to my cell phone. So anybody calls the office, if I'm not in the office, it will go to my cell phone. During major storms and emergency situations, I am there getting answers and passing along that information on my Facebook, making sure that everybody knows what's going on. We've had some major storms over the last 3 years with major power interruptions and trees going down everywhere. So people needed to know what was going on. I'm there making sure that all the departments have what they need by having daily meetings with their CEO and EMO and all the emergency departments. Communication is crucial when there is no power or fire is raging in our woods. I have and will continue to lead every day, and answer everybody's questions. Blacks Harbor and Beaver Harbor know that I live with this water situation as they all do. This has to remain number one priority. We will complete this as soon as possible because simply it has to be done. I will be the voice to upper levels of government to ensure that we get the financial support that we need. The last thing I'll say is, as well, I hope that a new municipal plan and zoning bylaw be done with full public participation so that bylaws are easy to understand and reflects everybody's values. All planning decisions have to ensure all adjacent property owners is fully considered and respected. Farmland should be protected, but growth and subdividing large land areas be permitted. We can be the next Sussex. If you drive by Sussex, you see the green rolling hills, but they also have all the Walmarts and superstores. We can be Sussex, and that's what I want this Eastern Charlotte to be.
Adam Hatt and David Hatt reoffered in terms of council. Daryl Tidd reoffered, but largely the rest of those seats were empty. The incumbent councillor didn't reoffer. So perhaps John is a reflection of familiarity and trust because of his experience, but also because he's one of the few faces that wants to come back to the table. And
interesting to see people like Matthew Hall become a councillor in Eastern Charlotte. I think anyone who watches those meetings on our channel, the full gavel to gavel Eastern Charlotte meetings, will know that he speaks up a lot at the end when you're given 5 minutes. The public can air their grievances or express their concerns or even talk about something that's coming up that they'd look for the town's support on. Nevertheless, Matthew has been at almost every meeting, maybe even every meeting in the last year, and has been paying close attention and often has remarks for the council at the end that take a critical eye at some of their decisions.
Well, and that's that civic engagement that I talked about in that first segment, that desire to be, listening, watching, asking questions. And I think Matthew is part of that, right? Chandra Best, another great example of someone who consistently comes to council meetings. And actually, when she presented herself at Meet the Candidate, she said, I'm not just joining now and I'm hoping to learn, I've been learning. And so that would speak volumes to voters, because they know that they've been listening and that they've been paying attention and that they have a vested interest in how the community develops in the future. So I think that that was reflected largely in the vote.
And I think it's always interesting to watch people who go from being someone who is an actively engaged resident to becoming a member of council. It's always fun to watch them get into the role, be in that decision-making seat, and then maybe experience the role differently than when you're sitting in the audience.
And I will say, for clarity, the students voted Alexa Didarakis in as mayor, not John. So again, a younger crowd, right, who Alexa would appeal to. She is a young mother, a professional working woman, and so people see themselves in her. And so I think maybe this time around it was about, you know, just the trusted face, the familiarity of the situation. And you said it was close, so there is a path forward, certainly, and I think that she did very well. And John, you know, said thanked her for putting her name on the ballot and commended her for that decision.
Yeah, and they both, for the Meet Your Candidates night, Eastern Charlotte, I felt they both really had solid arguments throughout the night and presented well to the voters. So it was interesting to watch that race. It was interesting to see how close it was, and for us to not really be able to predict the outcome.
Yeah, so I will go through the candidates that were elected. So at large, it was Adam Hatt and David Hatt. So those familiar faces that you would have seen in the last term. Logan Martin, Ward 1, Michael Thompson, Ward 2. Sam Rubin was elected to Ward 3 by acclamation. Matthew Hall, Ward 4, Patty Borthwick, Ward 5, and Lucy Stevens, who defeated Daryl Tidd, the incumbent, in Ward 6.
Okay, well, it'll be, I'm excited to go to all the new meetings and get to know our new councils with both former members that we're very familiar with and new members too.
Yeah, you get to go to the Eastern Charlotte meeting, so you kind of get a front row seat. So I'll be excited to hear what that looks like, what the composition of council looks like as they learn, they get their sea legs, I guess you could call it.
Yep, it's going to be fun.
We're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, we're going to talk about some infrastructure money heading to Grand Manan.
Now, we all know that funding is just a word until the construction equipment starts working.
Welcome back to This Week Uncut. I'm Nathalie Sturgeon.
And I'm Vicki Hogarth. We're heading over to Grand Manan. Well, actually, we did head over to Grand Manan together last week for a very exciting announcement on a wharf.
On the boat. I went on the boat, guys.
She did.
I did, and I did well.
Yeah.
I enjoy it more and more every time I go.
You did.
Probably it's, you know.
You were very brave too, because we brought my dog Maud with us this time too. So we were up on the deck for the ferry ride. So yeah, you were very brave, and we had a great time.
Where there's no walls between the floor and the ocean. That's where we were. But exposure therapy works, clearly.
Yeah, we missed ferry breakfast, but we ended up having breakfast at the sequel. So thank you, Selena.
That's right. So we went over because the Federal Secretary of State for the Canada Revenue Agency and Financial Institutions, Wayne Long, who also happens to be St. John Ross's MP, was there to announce some funding for North Head and Ingalls Head wharves.
And this is about $1 billion investment, right? That's going to small craft harbors. So do we know yet the amount that is going to the two wharves on Grand Manan? No,
we don't. And you will hear the Secretary talk about that. Because there's a planning process that has to start, right? And we know that the cost of things is escalating, right? So if they were to allocate a specific amount and then it came in over budget, they'd have to, redirect money from elsewhere, and they sort of want that piece of the puzzle to fit, at least according to what the Secretary said. But Ingalls Head, is a working wharf that I think it's a combined 150-ish commercial vessels that use North Head and Ingalls Head. So that one will be reconstructed. And then North Head will be reconstructed as well, but it has a few more components to it. I think there's an A and a B and a C, so there's a few pieces to that puzzle. But that that particular wharf has been a focal point for the community.
We were able to actually talk to MP Long about that wharf and what had happened with the delays when Greenfield Construction was involved with wharf repairs there. There was I guess you could call it a rubble pile that went through 2 tourism seasons that blocked the view. It even led to one restaurant, a beloved restaurant in the community, feeling like they had to shut down because it was that impactful to business. So we did ask MP Long if that was part of the reason it was chosen, and he was very upfront that yes, that did play a factor.
Yeah, I mean, you'll hear him talk about why that decision was made, but that was a $15.8 million contract that was awarded to Greenfield Construction, and it just was never finished. And so the Village of Grand Manan entered into a memorandum of understanding with Procurement Service Canada to move those rocks out of there at minimum, clear the view, restore what that does exist there, and sort of get back to a status quo until obviously new money and a new construction company can be sourced to finish the project.
It was great to be on Grand Manan though and see all the people. That was quite a nice crowd over on Ingalls Head. So we had a great time on the wharf and talking with the locals too that came out. And it was a really beautiful day. So I think last time we went to Grand Manan it was raining. So yeah.
Brian Guptill is the Grand Manan Fishermen's Association president, and he said the investment will mean that Ingalls Head and North Head will no longer just be holding on.
I welcome everyone to this important moment for our wharf users. I want to start by welcoming the Honorable Wayne Long, Secretary of State, responsible for the CRA and the financial institutions.
Tax season's over. So.
Our honorable and the honorable guests from our community. I'll keep this brief because I know there's gear to mend and plenty of work waiting for us back on the water. We've all spent enough time at Ingalls Head and North Head to know that these wharves are more than just concrete and timber. They are the backbone of this island. For a long time now, we've been looking at the cracks, dealing with the wear and tear, and frankly worrying about whether our infrastructure was going to hold up for the demands we've been placing upon the wharves today. Well, today I'm glad to finally say that the message got through. We've received official word on the significant funding investment dedicated specifically to North Head and Ingalls Head wharves. Now, we all know that funding is just a word until the construction equipment starts working. But what it actually means is that we can finally address the severe deterioration we have seen happen in the last number of years. It means safer berths, more reliable platforms to land our catch, and a harbor that isn't just holding on, but is actually built to last for the next generation of fishermen coming up behind us. I want to thank the folks who put in the hours in behind the scenes to make the case for Grand Manan. It's not always easy to get people in offices far away to understand what happens on a slippery deck at 4 a.m, but this time they listened. This is a win for our owner-operators, for the crews, and for every family on this island that relies on a healthy fishery. It's about making sure that when we head out to the bay, we have a solid, safe place to come home to. Thank you again, Honorable Minister Long, for delivering the good news to us today.
That was Brian Guptill, the president of the Grand Manan Fishermen's Association. So we did speak to him, as you mentioned, in that scrum environment, although scrum is a bit of a vague word because it was only us.
Yeah. The careers, CHCO, but we do both. Yeah.
We're scrumming with each other, as is natural. And so he did say that they need to put out a request for proposals. So he said that process is going to get underway.
We need to obviously put out requests for proposals. And I mean, I would agree. Some people would say, well, what's the dollar amount? Well, honestly, we don't know if the dollar amount is $17 million or $150 million. But I do know that these projects will be completed. I'm telling you that. with 100% certainty, these projects have been prioritized, and out of that $954 million extra dollars, the projects from 401 to ABC, 402 will be completed. So that's the commitment. Well, I mean, we recognize the issue with the delays and the rock and everything else. And I mean, obviously it was a bit of a sore spot for us. So, you know, obviously we did discuss that, and we want to make sure we get that right, and that's why we've included that one. So the spring economic update, which, you know, obviously we're all involved in, is going to pledge another $957 million over 5 years to support and maintain the 950 federally owned small craft harbors in Canada. And that money is long overdue. It's the largest sustainable funding increase in over a decade. And as we build economic resilience, it will support local economic development for generations to come. We need to invest, because if we don't invest, our industries aren't going to grow. So it's good news for harvesters, local communities, and for the economy. And we all know that small craft harbors are a lifeline. They support fishing, transportation, the local economies built around them. These harbors land roughly 90% of Canada's fish harvest and underpin our entire seafood economy, keeping them safe, accessible, and in good repair. But it takes real sustainable commitment. And small craft harbors sustain more than 45,000 jobs in the fish and seafood industry, as well as many thousands of additional jobs in supporting industries. They also provide critical infrastructure to multiple Indigenous communities by supporting them, exercising their Indigenous treaty rights. The funding announced in the spring economic update will support a variety of work in these harbors. This includes maintenance, repairs, most importantly, new construction, dredging, making harbor infrastructure more resilient to the impacts of climate change and extreme weather. You'll remember back in September of 2022, many small craft harbors across Atlantic Canada and eastern Quebec suffered massive damage with Hurricane Fiona. We all felt the impact of that. Almost 4 years later, the fishing industry and coastal communities is still trying to recover, still trying to pick up from that devastating generational storm. This funding will help those coastal communities rebuild and build stronger. So here at Ingalls Head Fisherman's Wharf, the investments will be used for advanced planning and reconstruction of wharf structure 401. Also in Grand Manan at the Fisherman's Wharf at North Head, the funding will support design, planning, and full reconstruction of structure 401B, as well as design and planning for future replacement of structures 401A, 401C, and 402. This investment and commitment will create jobs and support the fisheries, aquaculture, tourism, construction, and marine engineering sectors, while ensuring that the harbors that coastal life depends on stay open, functional, and working.
That was Secretary of State for the Canada Revenue Agency and Financial Institutions, Wayne Long, speaking to us on Grand Manan Island. And I obviously reached out to a Member of Parliament, John Williamson, who represents Grand Manan and much of Southwest New Brunswick, for his comments on this issue, because we have spoke about North Head in the past and his frustration with that project sort of just sitting there. He wants, a blacklist developed, right, of people who can no longer bid on government contracts because of failure to complete them in a timely fashion. But, he did say that this project is long overdue. He said it's welcome news, but he said he applied pressure, to the government to get these projects done. There are 900 or so federally owned wharves in Canada, and I would venture to guess that there's a lot of them in Atlantic Canada. So certainly he wanted to apply pressure to them to get this project over the finish line. And had he said had it been well managed from the start, it'd be done by now. But he does expect that it will take up to 5 years for that project to be completed, both of them. So that's a long time down the road, but it means that it is going. And he said he's going to continue to advocate for this area and for the wharves that exist here and that need infrastructure updates.
Okay, well, it'll be interesting to see what wharves make it onto that list in our neck of the woods.
We're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, we're going to take a look at an independent living facility set to close this summer.
Welcome back to This Week Uncut. I'm Vicki Hogarth.
And I'm Nathalie Sturgeon. So we're going to give you a little bit of a timeline on Lana Sarah Hall. I know in the throw to the break, you would have heard that it was under threat of closure. So in early April, we got that news from the Board of Trustees that they just couldn't continue under the current circumstances.
And obviously, this was a big deal in the community. Word spread very fast. A lot of concerned citizens, whether they had family or friends there, or it's just a known institution that houses so many beloved locals.
Lana Sarah Hall has been operating in St. Stephen for 90 years, 9 decades. So it is a fixture, right? St. Stephen, relies on this as, someone's retirement plan. I think we heard from, people on social media who said, I planned on retiring there because it's not a long-term care facility, it's independent living, so you get a bit of freedom, and also it's a gorgeous home.
Mm-hmm. So what's the latest? Where are we at now? I know you've been covering this extensively since it was on uneasy grounds.
Yeah, so essentially what happened was we got some information to suggest that the Board of Trustees was not open to accepting help that had been provided. And so I went back to the Board of Trustees and I asked for an interview. One was not provided, but they did answer several questions that I had included in the email in the event that I wasn't going to get an interview. And they answered some of those. And at that point, right, they sort of said, there's no scenario under which we can continue to operate this facility because of all of the reasons that they said: financial, the increased level of service for seniors, and the provincial government has no involvement in Lana Sarah Hall. It's not publicly funded. It's not publicly owned. It just is funded through the Maria F. Ganong Foundation, and I think it's the Maria F. Ganong Old Folks Home is the name of the foundation. So they sort of said, no, there's no reasonable expectation. And I did some research on, the number of days it takes for an assessment, because a lot of these seniors would have either found different placement through private or would have been placed with social development for an assessment. And in Charlotte County, or in Southwest New Brunswick, that's 76 days. So it sort of seemed like there was a lot of uncertainty about whether or not these individuals could be assessed in a reasonable amount of time to be placed. Would they go to the hospital? But then if you look at the hospital, I think as of the end of April, it was 106% capacity. So that's over capacity. And their bed occupancy is also like that's their bed occupancy. And their ALC patients, while not as large as some of the regional hospitals, is quite high. So it's sort of a question of where they were going to go. And we sort of sat with that information, I think, for maybe 24 hours. And you got a call from Home Support Services indicating to us that there would be some sort of news that would come later on that afternoon. And they sort of said, well, we're talking to each other. And that's a good sign, because it didn't, 24 hours earlier, it was no scenario under which this could happen. And they kept it quite vague. They just said key stakeholders We're talking with Home Support Services and the Board of Trustees at Lana Sarah Hall to figure it out, what they could do, what they could come up with. And now today, this week, we have received word that they've signed a letter of intent to maintain the operation of Lana Sarah Hall in the short term. So I just want to be really clear. They said through recent discussions, both organizations have identified an opportunity to pause resident transitions while a comprehensive proposal is developed and presented to government partners. So you could read between the lines there a little bit. So that means that nobody is leaving right now. Again, the release is purposely vague because they're still figuring it out. But this means right now that the 13 people living in Lana Sarah Hall do not have to leave.
Okay, I hope that news gives some relief to people who are definitely concerned about where their loved ones will go. So that's wonderful to end the week off with just a little positivity and hope. So thank you.
The story has evolved. So we're glad that they're keeping us up to date and they're getting that information to us so we can tell the public.
All right. Well, it's always a pleasure to sit beside you. I know we've been away from this desk covering the election and campaigns for so long. Looking ahead to next week, what are you working on?
Well, I have some story, a story about the wharf that is coming before the end of this week, but likely will be, into that will carry us into the weekend.
St. Andrew's Wharf.
Yes.
Okay.
Sorry.
Yeah.
We discussed
so many wharves
today. The St. Andrew's Wharf and that project. Council will start meeting again next week. There is a St. Andrew's Council meeting on the 19th. And I believe they're going to get back into gear here a little bit and start rolling as the new composition. And I'm very excited.
And, a reminder to people at home, the nomination papers for Ward 3, if you want to run in the town of St. Andrews and you live in Ward 3, nomination period is open again. Paul Harpel from Elections New Brunswick let me know that it starts this weekend. So here we go again. It's not quite over here. Good thing we're still really in election mode. I don't think it's really had a chance to wind down yet.
I think I said to you, I haven't even breathed yet from the last one, and I'm already in another one. But it will be shorter. It will be more compact. We're not dealing with multiple municipalities. This is one municipality and 4 seats. Hopefully there is a healthy turnout. In terms of the number of candidates, please visit Elections New Brunswick for the criteria on who is eligible to run, what kind of paperwork you need, how you need to fill that paperwork out. The deadline for those papers is May 29th at 2 p.m., not 2:01. You can't send them at 2:01. 2 p.m.
Yeah, and that means also the people who had put their names forward previously, who did get their papers in, that still has to happen all over again. So really we start from zero in Ward 3 and do this all over again. So it'll be interesting to follow. Good thing, we're still in election mode, but it is a pleasure to sit with you here again. It's been a while since we've been in the studio. We've been on the road doing Meet Your Candidates. So it's nice to hash out the week with you at the end of it right here again.
It's like a weekly debrief.
It's a bit of a therapy.
I'm always happy to be here. Thanks for watching This Week Uncut. We'll see you next week. I'm Nathalie Sturgeon.
And I'm Vicki Hogarth.